The U.S. broke their treaty with Native Americans not once, but on multiple occasions. They made a treaty with the people of Cheyenne to give them a certain amount of land forever in order to prevent war. Unfortunately, miners found their way onto the land and discovered gold. Now, when a miner discovers gold, more miners are bound to come. So, the Cheyenne people found the miners and started killing them. Any white man that infiltrated their land, they would kill them. And of course, this is going to cause issues with the US government. Because we all live in the US, we should be aware of one of the most deadly massacres in this country's history. The Sand Creek Massacre was an impactful historical event. The Sand Creek Massacre impacted Native Americans, racial tensions, and US citizens. The Sand Creek Massacre's impact on Native Americans. So, according to Sand Creek Massacre, a dilemma at the University of Colorado in 1995, Black Kettle was the leader of the Cheyenne people. He was a shining star when it came to peace between whites and Native Americans. He really advocated for that, even though not a lot of people wanted it. According to From Bloodless to Bloody, the 3rd Colorado Cavalry in the Sand Creek Massacre in 1967, Black Kettle met with U.S. Army leaders in order to figure out a safe place for his tribe to take refuge, and this was decided to be at Sand Creek. They even gave him an American flag to show the truce, I guess. So, according to Arapaho and Cheyenne perspectives, there were 800 Cheyenne peoples there at the camp, 2/3 women and children, and they set up the camp, placing the American flag right in front of Black Kettle's tent. So now we've been moving on from racial tension, or from Native Americans to racial tensions. So the Sand Creek Massacre had an impact on racial tensions. So according to White Lies, Native Revisions, A Legacy of Violence in the American West 2019, a man named John Shivington was highly involved in the massacre. John Shivington was a white man who was able to gather he was a white general who was able to gather a group of 700 militia and march on the camp at night while everybody was asleep. According to All the Camp Was Weeping, George Bent and the Sand Creek Massacre in 1995, John Shivington and his militia surrounded the camp and gave no warning on their attack. They left 150 to 200 dead, mostly women and children. Well, now we'll be moving on from racial tensions to U.S. citizens. So the Sand Creek Massacre had a huge impact on U.S. citizens. All around the U.S., people had different opinions about the Sand Creek Massacre. According to Sand Creek Massacre, a dilemma at the University of Colorado in 1995, people in the East were extremely upset. They saw this massacre as an atrocity, like, how could this ever happen? Why is our government letting children and women be murdered? Now, back in the West, John Shivington was being glorified. They didn't think that people in the East could understand how their life in the West was. They didn't understand how Indians would attack their homes every day because they wanted their land back. According to White Lies, Native Perversions, The Legacy of Violence in the American West 2019, John Shivington basically became a king in the West. He was glorified. Although later on in life, he did die of an extremely painful cancer, so I guess that's great. So, the Sand Creek Massacre, it impacts Native American, racial tensions, and U.S. citizens. The Sand Creek Massacre was an extremely impactful event. So, Black Kettle, the leader of the Cheyenne peoples, was actually able to survive the Sand Creek Massacre. He was one of the only people who survived the massacre. Now, unfortunately, he did die 4 years later in a very similar massacre. Although through his entire life he advocated for peace between whites and Native Americans, he didn't like the bloodshed, but ironically, he died at the hands of a white man. So, the Native Americans experienced numerous unknown hardships.